Okay, there we go. So we're recording now. So let me just introduce our speaker, Philip Horn. Philip works for British Council Global Assessment and is based in Manchester. His main job is in language test development and in co-managing and training the item writing team. He has an MA in language testing from Lancaster University and is currently working towards a PhD focused on assessing pragmatics in computer-based speaking tests. He previously worked as an examiner and assessment solutions consultant in China. So Philip, if you're ready to start, then I'll hand things over to you now.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So you can see my slides, is that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so I'm going to go into slideshow mode, so I don't know how much I'll be able to see. Okay, is everyone able to see?
Yep, that's fine.
It's perfect. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to set my timer. Give me 1 second. So my talk today is on item writers as stakeholders, a training and developmental model. So I've divided this into two sections. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the context within which we work, and then speak a little bit more broadly about features of effective item writing. And then from there, I'd like to go into a proposed research study. So I'll take you through my research questions, the methodology that I'm proposing to use to create a conceptual theoretical framework of item writing skills, talk about possible results and hypothesize conclusions that may come out of that, so the direction I'm expecting things to go in. So I work for Global Assessment. We are part of a British Council. We're a global team who provide innovative assessment solutions to clients globally. So among other things, our activities are managing assessments that are owned by the British Council. That includes APTIS. We work with governments to help them deliver assessment through our solutions service. And we work with countries and local exam teams to provide assessment support for learners and for teachers. So to help us do that, we have a team who do commissioned work for us of 50 item writers and 10 quality reviewers. And this team is responsible for the item development and review process, and that's my main day job, so to speak. So items do subsequently go through pre-testing, data analysis, and final content checks and so on, but we manage the production side of things. So based upon specifications, actually producing the items. So to help us do that, we use what we call item moderation sheets. So these are kind of like checklists, and they help reviewers go through step by step to make sure that everybody's standardized, that we're looking for the same kinds of issues, that item writers are receiving the same kind of feedback. So these would cover issues, so they cover quantifiable aspects, so like word count and appropriate level of grammar and so on. So these things are fairly quantifiable. They're quite concrete, but they're also more subjective issues. So it would touch, for example, upon text authenticity, whether the language is natural, whether the line of thought throughout the text is logical, whether it's representative of the kind of texts you would expect to see in the real world.
Sorry, Philip, just to interrupt you for a second. I noticed your slides are not moving. We're still looking at slide 1 right now.
How are you? Okay.
Yeah, so if the slideshow mode is not working, what you might want to do is just go to the thumbnail mode and click through each one.
So give me one.
Sometimes the slideshow mode can be a bit funny with screen shares. So
Okay.
you just go to the main. Yeah, there we go. Now we can see. Now we're on slide 4. Yes, you'll just have to click down it by the side. I don't know why the slideshow.
Okay. Okay, right. That's fine. No problem. Thank you. Yeah, so just to cover the first slide you missed, then I was just talking about global assessments, about the 50 item writers and reviewers. I don't think you saw that slide then. Okay, is this working now if I go through it?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, we'll do it that way, no problem. Yeah, so the item moderation sheets go through all of these things, and some of these points are more subjective than others. So let me just give you an example. I'll just give you a moment to read this. This is a listening dialogue for an A2 item. So this is a first draft listening dialogue. So the issues then that the reviewer would be expected to look at then would be around mainly authenticity. So for example, the man says, "Hi, the film's about to start, where are you?" The woman says, "I'm sorry, I'm running a bit late." And then the man says, "Are you going to drive?" Which is not really a very logical rejoinder, because in that context, you'd be more likely to say, "Oh, where are you now? How much longer do you think you'll be?" So the man just then goes through alternatives. And then the woman seems to say she's walking to the bus stop. She'll come by bus, which, considering the film's about to start, it sounds like she hasn't even left yet. So she's probably very late indeed. So it's kind of a clunky dialogue. It's not really very authentic. So even though it's a good execution in terms of the integration of information, there are issues on that side. Similarly, I think I'm going to, can I close this? Yeah. This is a reading segment. This is from a higher level text. Again, I'll just give you a minute just to have a little read, because there's a lot of text. Okay, so this is a B2 level reading text, or the start of a B2 level reading text on the oil and gas industry. And the issues here then, so I've highlighted in yellow. So it opens with oil and gas, which is a little bit clunky in a text about fashion. So it seems a little bit jarring when suddenly we think we're going to be reading about fashion, and then it's talking about oil and gas, and then it switches back to fashion. At the start of the second paragraph, that bit there that's highlighted, I mean, that's quite a lengthy gloss of what clothes are. It's not very authentic. You'd expect the reader to know what clothes are, especially in this kind of text. So that's a little bit awkward. Conversely, this phrase here, "the type of clan we identify with," that's a little bit unclear what that means. I think that would need a little bit more expanding. And then it talks about clothing once being predominantly practical, but in recent times a shift towards a fashion industry. So factually, it seems a bit funny as well. I mean, fashion existed in ancient civilizations, in Greece and Rome, in ancient Egypt. So it's a little bit clunky in terms of the facts, the way it's glossing certain things. So these are the kinds of things that would need reviewing. So to look at these then, items go through a first draft. So those were two first drafts that we just looked at. They are reviewed by reviewers. And then from that, the item writer will produce a final version. But this is very idealized. It's quite clinical. It looks very logical. In real life, the process is a lot more cyclical. It's quite iterative, and items go through various stages, and you're looking at different things at different times, and looking at different features such as the distractors, the integration of information, all kinds of things. So it's quite a cyclical process. But part of the issue perhaps is that some of the issues are not actually tangible and quantifiable in a sense, and they're quite hard to express through moderation sheets and specifications precisely what it is we're looking for. So these phrases I've got on this slide here, they're quite informal. They're not very academic, but they are the sort of things that come up in review meetings. So, for example, we might talk about something being a bit of a word salad, for instance. So this is when so the item writers tried to maybe shoehorn in a distractor or something. So, and then you get the text becomes a little bit confused, a little bit unintelligible, not entirely logical. Burying the lead, that's an expression from journalism. So we saw an example of that in the fashion text. So this is where, so in true journalism, the first sentence should be a hook that should bring you into the text. But in fact, sometimes we see that the writer can bury this. So the most interesting part of their text comes a bit later, and less relevant and distracting information comes first. What we would refer to as a nothing burger. So this would be something that's perhaps insignificant, lacking in substance. So you often see this, for example, in texts which talk about the internet, for example. It affects every aspect of our daily lives, something that's quite bland and probably these days not really newsworthy anymore. The internet's been with us for many years now, so commenting as if it's something new is what we might say it's a nothing burger. Water cooler conversations. So this would be sort of people talking about topics in a sort of superficial way, possibly from a less informed or personal perspective. So especially in higher level texts where we want to encourage thinking at a more abstract level. So more in terms of its applicable of its application to the wider world rather than somebody's just own personal experiences of it. So from this then, so a problem statement would be that item writers are indubitably key stakeholders in the test development process, and investing in training and upskilling a good team, an elite team to do that is a very worthwhile investment. But it does need to be determined, I think, a little bit more effectively how to identify existing skills and how to develop effective training, feedback, and reviewing procedures to help the process. So in terms of an item writer role profile then, so when we are recruiting, the things we would ask for might be attention to detail, writing skills, editing skills, and so on. But these are skills that item writers they should already possess. So the question then is, what does training need to focus upon to develop these skills for purpose? So when we start dividing them up, you might notice, for example, a division into lower level items and higher level items. So at lower levels, we may want, so you may need the ability to grade language within very tight confines. You need to understand what we mean by familiar and by concrete, whereas at higher levels, it's more about writing in the truer sense of the word, how to write authentically in a range of different genres, write natural spoken and dialogic texts, and so on. So for training then, I think there are two main approaches. One is what we might call the product-oriented approach to item writing. So this is the traditional one where item writers, they receive a model, they receive specifications, and then based upon that, they use that as a model to produce their own. So the advantages of that is that item writers do learn very effectively from clear models, from good sample items. Also that specifications can't fully convey the full sense of a final item without a good accompanying example. And these samples are quite good benchmarks in terms of the complexity, the level of familiarity or abstractness, and the requisite sub-skills and so on. But the limitations would be, well, you need a very wide range of sample items, because if you only just have one or two, then you're limiting yourself, because the specifications, it can refer to a much broader range of potential texts. Specifications can change and develop, and as a result of that, models can become outdated in certain aspects. It could be just a small thing like word count, but there are some differences that may be confusing. Most importantly, though, is that it leads to an over-dependence on samples rather than specifications. So item writers are writing to a pre-existing model rather than writing a text themselves. And because of this, then that production process doesn't really mirror the natural writing process. So texts are prepared backwards, with the test item in mind, and as a result of that, then aspects such as authenticity and naturalness can start to suffer. So training can become overly focused on particular skills as well. And so by that, so training can become focused on reading items or reading B2 items or listening items. But key skills that would be relevant to both would be to both reading and listening then would be less well developed. So as an alternative, then we could have what we might call a process-oriented approach to item writer training. So process skills and knowledge. So as we've mentioned, items go through a more cyclical and iterative production process to balance all spec requirements. So this then, under a process-oriented approach for reviewing would be more collaborative. And then key areas for training would focus less on, for example, how to write reading B2 items, and it would focus more on aspects such as effective integration of appropriate information across sentences, how to paraphrase well, how to write items which target inferencing at higher levels, how to write effective distractors, how to write well in a range of different genres and contexts. So all these kinds of things you can hone in on. And I think what's important to remember as well is that different people need differently focused training. So what I propose to look at then in this action research study is what I'd like to do is determine the key competencies for item writers, and then to consider whether these are adequately reflected in current specifications and moderation sheets, and then how to bridge the gap if any are identified. So research questions become, so when first items are coded for issues, are the emergent coding categories directly comparable with existing categories in our moderation sheets? And 2, what areas emerge as important for further training and development through quantitative analysis? So what this would look like in practice then, a research design. So I'd like to begin by coding existing items, particularly at the first draft stage, to look at what's going wrong and what's not up to specification. And then once you code existing items, if you did this on a cline, so for example, 1 would be fully met, 2 partially met, 3 would be needs some substantial work, and 4 would be not acceptable at all. From there, you could run exploratory factor analysis to start determining sort of more latent skills and abilities. And then from there, you could start to create a more theoretical framework of core competencies for item writers. And then if there is a gap, think, so between what item writers can do and what they need to be able to do. If there is a gap, then think how to fill it. So should it be through further training, for example? Should it be through amendments to specifications? Should it be through instructions which are given to writers at the commission stage? So what I expect then is that, so first of all, so moving to this process approach, we're not proposing to eliminate elements of product-oriented item writing. So like we said, sample items are very important. Item writers do need clear examples, but critical features of text appropriateness, authenticity, cohesive logic, I submit that these would be better developed through feedback and tasks which are specifically focused upon these areas. And you would also focus on any other areas which emerge through the study. So it's very important to identify precisely what these areas are. So I'd like to prepare these results as a technical report. Obviously, the key limitation is time. Test developers get very involved in the day-to-day administration of things. There's always items to review and invoices to prepare and so on. So time is a key factor, but I think it is a very important thing to do. And that more or less brings me to the end of the talk. Just before I go, though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about a training course we are developing on FutureLearn. This is for a global audience for anybody who may be interested in item writing. So the aims of the course would be to take you through testing principles and specifications and actually producing items. So if you would like information on this, here is the web address at the bottom here, iwc@britishcouncil.org. And so this course offers institutions professional development opportunity, which aims to enhance test development and assessment quality. So if you would like any further information on that, here's the address again, iwc@britishcouncil.org. Okay, thank you very much for your patient attention. That brings me to the end.
All right, thanks, Philip, for that. That was interesting. I noticed there was while you were talking, there was a bit of discussion in the chat as far as what kind of tools are available for measuring the levels of text that are going to be adapted. I assume probably for reading text. So some things were mentioned like Text Inspector, Lex Tutor. There's a website here called online-utility.org, which I haven't heard of. But do you have any particular tools or sites that you would recommend to people that they could use?
Yeah, we do. I mean, there's quite a few of them. I mean, for example, for lexical level, for example, we use the British National Corpus, but that's certainly not the only one. Depending on who your audience is, maybe you want to use a corpus more skewed towards American English, so like the COCA, for example, the Corpus of Contemporary American English. For reading level, we use Flesch-Kincaid. I think even through Microsoft Word, there's a function you can measure it. I think the important thing is that everybody uses the same one, because even something like Flesch-Kincaid, even though it's supposed to be the same level, so that will give you, for example, a readability score, so how difficult the text is to process. Even like if you run it on Microsoft Word, and then if you run it in Cometrics, for example, which is an online website, it comes up with completely different scores. Yeah, I don't know why that is, but I think everyone should be using the same.
Like even on the difference between Windows and Mac, I get different Flesch scores. I don't know why that is. So I thought the formula is just a mathematical formula, but.
Yeah, you think it would be the same because exactly, it is a formula, so you think it would just go through the same process, but I don't know why that is, but it is good to
sorry, I see there's
everyone on the same page for main consideration.
See, there's another question in the chat that's just appeared. Somebody's asking you, how can we say a text is authentic or not? What do we actually mean by that?
Well, this is part of a problem because it's very, very subjective. So if we talk about a higher level text, if something should be a newspaper article, for example, then what we mean by authentic is that it's of publishable quality, essentially. So it could conceivably at some point have been in a newspaper. So even though it's been graded for language and certain, it's been condensed and abridged and shortened and adapted for purpose, it should still look like it was once a newspaper article and be believable and written in an appropriate style and an appropriate way. And so that's what we mean by authenticity. So it's quite a broad category, and I actually think it needs sort of breaking down a little bit more, because it sort of encapsulates at the moment good writing. So if something is badly written, then we can say it's not authentic because it wouldn't be published if it's gone through an editing process.
Right.
So it's quite a difficult thing to pin down, and I think it does need breaking down a little bit more.
Another comment just appeared here. This is from Linda Hassan's asking. She says, in my organization, we are using outcome-based education, and all academic staff have to set test papers, which means they are all item writers. What is your take on this? Do you think this is an advantage or a disadvantage?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, actually. I can see it here. So we're using outcome-based. I'm not sure what outcome-based education is, to be honest. So I don't think I'd like to comment on that unless
Linda, you could expand.
Could you expand a little bit more on what that is?
What's just while we're waiting for that? Oh, here we go. Somebody else posting. So building on the authenticity question, how do we balance this for listening text, given that spoken grammar language is quite different to written?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, if you've listened to listening tasks, obviously the language can be quite stilted, but I think it should still be logical as well. So, for example, in that A2 dialogue we saw, so it just wasn't logical. So the way it was structured, the way it sort of went through the process, it just you wouldn't see it in real life. So in listening items, perhaps we talk more about authenticity of context rather than authenticity of language. So would you see a conversation like this in this context? So in the case of that A2 listening item we looked at, I'd say, well, no, you wouldn't, because people just wouldn't talk like that. So, but if you changed it to what film do they decide to see, for example, so two people, they're already at the cinema, they have a choice of film, shall we see a horror, shall we see an action film? That would be a bit more logical, so contextually authentic. So even though the language would be a little bit stilted, I think that would work better in that kind of item.
I see now that there's two comments here that are kind of similar. Linda's added to her original point there. So basically both of these questions are asking about teachers creating their own tests, like teachers being item writers. How do you feel about the idea of teachers being item writers rather than using test materials that have been produced by professional item writers?
Well, I mean, I think we would have to come down to the question of validity, which is a huge topic. But what are these scores going to be used for? So if we need to make standardized decisions, then teachers working independently, creating their own tests, may lead to issues in that regard. So whereas if a teacher wants to create a classroom test for their own class as a progress test, then that would probably work more effectively in that context, if I've understood it correctly. But I think certainly with standardized assessment, the important thing is that it's a fair measure. So like any measurement device. So in the case of a ruler, for example, we have to know what a centimeter is. We have to know what a meter is. So if we have students who are getting these scores, then we need to know what they mean and how to interpret them. So from that angle, it's more based on the decisions and the interpretations of the scores rather than the items themselves. But if you do want to make standardized decisions, then teachers need standardization on how to prepare those. If I've understood that question correctly, that would.
We'll see in the chat if they're
Yeah.
happy with that or not. Okay, a few more comments and we're going to have to wrap up. So somebody here says, I think many teachers want to develop professionally so that they can write valid and effective test items. Just need to have appropriate training for this can be done with any confidence. And yeah, all right. Do you think that it's best for test developers to use a team of basically full-time item writers, or is it better to have lots of freelancers that you then kind of they get paid based on the quality of their work rather than having to crank out material in a sort of 9-to-5 job doing just test writing?
I mean, well, ideally, it would be good to have a smaller team of full-time writers. Practically, I don't know how that's going to be. I don't actually know of any institution that uses full-time item writers in that sense.
It's always free. Really is.
Typically item writing it's commissioned work. It's done on a more freelance basis. As far as I know, I could be wrong. I mean, there could be full-time item writing.
My experience, it's always been that way. So you find it difficult to recruit people that are to actually be able to sift through applications and find out what kind of people are usually good at doing this.
And I think that's sort of going back to what I was mentioning before. So training. So we want to identify certain existing skills. So the first question is what those existing skills should be, and then the next question is the best way to develop those skills for the purpose of item writing.
Right.
So two questions.
Yeah, I just noticed now that the time is running out and we've got to get ready. There's going to be another event. I just got notified by Chris Redmond. So everyone who's got a full pass holder, there's going to be Barry O'Sullivan and Luke Harding are going to be available in the plenaries and panels room from 3:40 to answer any questions there. So not in this room, but in the original room that we started in this morning. So anyone who's a full pass holder can go in there and they'll have a kind of open floor discussion for our 2 plenary speakers. So I'm going to wrap up now. And thanks a lot, Philip, for joining us today. That was very interesting.
Thank
And
you.
after that, after the plenary is over, I believe the next talk is going to start at 4 o'clock in this room. So thank you, everyone. I'll see you later.